So affinity fraud, what is affinity fraud and how to avoid it? So back in 2012, The Economist, which is a magazine, it reported that Utah was believed to have the highest per capita rate of affinity fraud in the US. And that was due to about 2/3 of the state's residents being members of the LDS Church. And so authorities, and one of my dear friends ran the securities division for the state of Utah for many years, Keith Woodwell. And I would call him a lot, and I would say, I'm dealing with this person who's dealing with this, and I would report these incidents to his division, and they would investigate them and look at what the causes were. And back in 2010, they estimated that in Utahns estimated 1.4 billion in 2010 alone, which is about an average of $500 per resident. And so in 2017, a statement from the FBI noted that Utah consistently ranked highest with the states with the most significant white-collar crime cases. And in 2011, the Utah legislature passed a bill, SB 101, which imposed tougher penalties on anyone that's convicted of a crime using their influence or position of trust to take advantage of an investor or vulnerable senior citizens specifically. And that was signed into law. And so when we look at what are some of the affinity fraud schemes that maybe are more well-known, that people have heard of, and one that comes to mind that's not on my list here would be the college admission scandal that we've probably heard of recently, that's over the course of several years, and that would be considered an affinity fraud as well. But we'll just kind of show you some of these. So in 2012, we had a Monroe Beachy, a trusted name in the Amish community, was sent to prison for orchestrating a scheme that defrauded about 2,700 investors. And most of those were friends and neighbors. You'll remember the name Bernie Madoff, or Bernard Madoff, who ran the largest Ponzi scheme in history, which is a $65 billion scam. And that was targeted towards wealthy Jewish people in Florida and Israel that came to light in 2008. And he went to jail for many years and just recently passed away. Alan Stanford, he went after the Southern Baptists. There's about $7 billion empire there. And here in Utah, this is a recent case. Galen Rust of Layton, Utah, and his company Rust Rare Coin. This got a lot of media attention. They were accused of fraudulently obtaining more than 170 million from about 200 people since May of 2013. And that was in a precious metals Ponzi scheme. So anything from precious metals to mortgage to investments, there's lots of different types of affinity fraud. So here's just a snapshot of some of the hot spots in our country. This was as of 2010, and you can see Salt Lake is highlighted in addition to San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York, and Dallas. So in the West, here we are comparing ourselves to San Francisco and Los Angeles with a much smaller population. But again, it goes back to that where there's close-knit communities and people that share the same interests, common interests, and whatnot. So here's a question I have for the group. When a friend or family member or coworker encourages you to invest your money in an opportunity guaranteed to pay you a return of, say, 10% or more per year, what would you do? And what should you do? My mother, who is in her late 70s, has been approached by several people that have guaranteed an investment on her money. And of course, she'll always call me and say, is this too good to be true? Or can you look up this person or look up that person? And those are situations that come up all the time. So what is affinity fraud? Let's define affinity fraud so that you understand what exactly we're talking about in terms of affinity. So an affinity would be something where you have common interests. You may share the same religion. You may share the same beliefs. You may share the same group. It could be a bingo group. It could be a men's golfing group. Those are things that are very common with affinity fraud. And when we look at how they target it, some of the most common populations that are targeted would be the elderly, ethnic communities, and religious communities. And the fraudsters that are involved in these scams, they'll pretend to be members of the group. So they're very trusting. They may enlist respected leaders from the group to help spread the word about the scheme. They may convince them that it's legitimate and worthwhile. And many times those leaders become unwittingly victims of the fraud that they help promote. And I've seen that firsthand. It's a scary thing, and it's very sad when you see people who trusted their friends, their neighbors, and were guaranteed a certain return on their investment, and it went south very quickly. When we look at the targets of affinity fraud, and this is based on the Securities Exchange Commission, which investigates and brings enforcement against these type of schemes. There's a wide spectrum of groups, and some of these are based on the ethnicity, the religion, sexual orientation. Military service is a big one, and the last one would be age or seniors, and primarily vulnerable seniors who may live alone. They may not have someone that's a primary caretaker, and whatnot. So people will say, well, how can I identify what's a trait? What's something that I can look at of a typical fraudster? And this is based on the SEC, the Exchange Commission, again, in terms of what these typical traits or characteristics look like. So they're very persuasive. They'll typically take control of the conversation. They like to build relationships. They're usually very friendly with everybody. They'll appeal to the dreamer in us, making us feel like that they can turn our money into gold overnight. They bring out the worst traits in humans, particularly they feed off of greed. And you'll hear that term pyramid scheme, and many of you are familiar with that term. They may make people feel inadequate or stupid, especially if they're using terminology and investment terminology or financial terms that they don't understand, and make it sound like they should understand those. And like I mentioned, they're very friendly, but they're very controlling. So how to avoid affinity fraud? This is really, really the crux of where we can dive in and help each other understand how to avoid it. So even if you know the person, maybe it's a son, maybe it's a daughter, maybe it's an uncle, an aunt, a grandparent, someone within your sphere of influence that you know very well, be sure to research their background, even if you know them, or even if you know the investment itself. No matter how trustworthy they are, the person who brings that opportunity to your attention seems to be. Be aware that that person that's telling you about it may have been fooled into believing it themselves. I've seen religious leaders that have get caught into this trap. It might be a member of their congregation. It might be someone that they went to school with. It might be a sorority sister or a fraternity brother. All these different affinity groups that, like I mentioned, are close-knit and tight-knit communities. Okay, 1 second here. Making sure all of my technology is working. Okay. So the first thing is never make an investment decision based solely on the recommendation of a member or an organization which you belong. So if you think about your own groups that you belong to, maybe it's an HOA that you belong to. Maybe it's a group that meets regularly weekly for lunch. Maybe you meet at the senior center, a community center, and it's something that you talk about. Maybe it's an online community, some of a social media group that you follow. Any of these type of groups, you need to make sure that you're doing your homework. An investment pitch that's made through an online group or a chat room or a bulletin board, maybe you saw something in the library that catered to your interest, that could be fraud. When I drive down the street and I see those signs that are nailed to a electric or a pole, a power pole, and it'll say, seeking an apprentice, make $5,000 a week. Those are very common fraud schemes. That's one of the most easy things that that fraudsters use to try to generate interest. When you look at investment schemes especially those that promise amazing profits or guaranteed returns, you need to be very leery of, especially if they say they have no risks. There's very few investments that are risk-free. Anytime you have an investment, you'll recall if you've ever bought a home or a car or anything like that, there's a lot of paperwork involved. Just like health insurance, there's a lot of documentation and things that you need to sign and releases of information and whatnot. Very similar to investments. There's always going to be some risks involved with that. Anything that's promising you high or quick or high profits with little or no risk, those are classic warning signs of fraud. So for example, let's say you get a mailer in your mail or a flyer that's dropped off on your door, and it's guaranteeing these high net returns. Maybe it's a phone call that you get from someone that you don't know. These are classic warning signs of fraud. Make sure that any opportunity that you're presented with that you get in writing. Often fraudsters will not put things in writing, and so you want to avoid any investment if you're told that they do not have the time to put it in writing, the particulars about the investment. And you should also be suspicious if you're told to keep that opportunity confidential or a secret. They may say, well, this is only available for the first 25 or 50 people that are looking to invest. I came across a situation several years ago myself where a friend of a friend had approached me about a business opportunity. And when I started asking those hard questions, the conversation turned very quickly. And he could tell that I was someone that probably knew more than the average Joe. And that person never called me back. And I called the individuals who I knew were involved and warned them of what they were dealing with. Again, don't be pressured or rush into anything about buying an investment before you have a chance to research it. Just because you know someone that may have made money on it, a classic Ponzi or a pyramid scheme, those first investors may make some money in the beginning, but it doesn't mean you will too. Anything that's pitched as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, or when they base their recommendation on an inside or confidential information, that can be considered insider trading. We've all heard of situations like that from many celebrities or high-profile individuals who have been conned into similar type of schemes. So let's talk about some of the common persuasion tactics. The first one is what we call the phantom riches tactic. And this is where dangling the prospect of wealth, enticing you with something that you want but can't have. And these, for example, these gas wells are guaranteed to produce $6,800 a month in income. So those gas wells in Vernal, those gas wells in the southern part of our state, this is something that happens all the time, fracking. You'll hear that term. This is that phantom riches tactic. And so when they dangle that in front of you and say that it's guaranteed and I can show you that, that's just a red flag right there. The second one would be what we call the source credibility tactic. And this is where they try to build credibility by claiming to be with a reputable firm. Maybe they have a really nice office and they invite you to their office. And you're just like, this has got to be real. This can't be fake. I mean, look at their offices. They're pristine. And so having a special credential or experience, and they may say, believe me, as a senior vice president of XYZ firm, I would never sell an investment that doesn't produce. So using their credentials, using their titles, that's that source credibility tactic. The third one would be what's called the social consensus tactic. And this is leading you to believe that other investors have already invested. So they'll say, this is how Marianne got her start, or this is how Preston got his start. And I know it's a lot of money, but I'm in, and so is my mom and half her church, and it's worth every dime. So they're trying to make you feel like it's a social consensus tactic. They're bringing you in. It's a VIP only type of situation, and so those are very common. And that's probably the most common one that I've seen in my experience, is where they use that social consensus tactic. The fourth one would be the reciprocity tactic. offering you to do a small favor for you in return for a big favor. So they'll say, for example, I'll give you a break on my commission if you buy now, half off. So that could be from an investor that is licensed or unlicensed, who does make a commission on what they might sell, and using that reciprocity, I'll do something for you if you do something for me. The scarcity tactic is creating a false sense of urgency, which claims limited supply. So they'll say, oh, there's only 2 units left, so I'd sign today if I were you. You'll see that with real estate quite a bit. You'll see that with vacation homes and properties in areas that might be desirable. And so that scarcity, it's really using that leverage, meaning that there's only a few. The opportunity, you got to take it now. You got to sign today, and if you don't, then you're going to miss out on this. So some of the concerns with relying on affinity. The first one is registration. So any person or company that seeks to pull in money or investor money has likely created a security that has 3 things. In Utah, for example, it has to be registered under Utah law. It's exempt from registration under Utah law, or a federal covered security notice that's filed in Utah. So they have to register that. The second would be licensing. So if they're a registered investment advisor, or they're selling any sort of investment vehicle, anyone that promotes this needs to be licensed with the Utah Division of Securities or the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC. It could be someone that's licensed as a broker-dealer, a broker-dealer agent, or issuer agent if they're affecting the securities transaction for compensation. So if they're receiving a percentage or a commission on that, they must be licensed. If the manager of the investment opportunity uses other investor funds to make investments in other securities, that manager must be licensed as an investment advisor or an investment advisor representative. And these can change from state to state. Just keep that in mind. So if you're out of state, or you're planning to move, or you've moved here recently, there might be some different licensing requirements. In many instances where affinity fraud takes place and there's violations or securities laws occur, if the investors have researched the licensing requirements and the company, they would probably have uncovered many of the problems prior to investing. So think of it like the Better Business Bureau, or perhaps if you're looking at reviews about a particular business, for example, Valley Behavioral Health. We're a large organization. We provide services to a vast majority of populations, and we get good reviews and we get bad reviews, just like any company. And so and we've got to be licensed to do what we do. So very similar to investments, if you do your homework and do it well, then you're able to uncover what some of these schemes might be and save yourself a lot of headache and a lot of heartache and a lot of time and money. So what are the top 10 ways? This is what the question I get the most. Well, how do I avoid being scammed? And this would be a really good takeaway slide for everybody here. Kind of your David Letterman, for those who know David Letterman, those top 10, how to avoid being scammed. And there's no humor in this at all, but this is something that is more on a serious note. The first one would be, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. That's the first one. The second one, keep church or keep worship services out of investing. That's something that's very, very common here in Utah and in states where you've got a predominant religion, where they have similar beliefs and interests. Don't invest with friends and neighbors. That's something that is very, very common. Make sure if you are investing with a friend or a neighbor that you do your homework, even if you think you know them. Do your homework, check them out, make sure they're licensed, make sure they're registered. Work through licensed stockbrokers or investment advisors. It's very easy to go on to the Utah Department website and just look up anyone who's claiming to be a licensed stockbroker or investment advisor. Beware of secret trading strategies. So for example, offshore investments, commodities, currency. The latest one would be cryptocurrency. So things like Bitcoin, minerals, futures, and options. Those are very high risk investments. And if you don't do your homework, it can cause you a lot of grief. Beware of guarantees. If it's a guarantee, if it's in writing and it's registered, that's one thing. But most investments don't have a guarantee that's associated with that. Again, get it in writing. Hire an attorney to look at the paperwork of the documentation that you've been giving. If you don't feel qualified or you need some help, hire an attorney. Do your homework. We mentioned that. I mentioned that in terms of doing your homework and making sure that who you're working with is legitimate and what they are selling is a viable investment. Last one would be slow down. Take it slow. It's not something that you need to just sign right there in front of them. You might want to think about it for a day or two or a week or whatever, however long it may take you, but just take your time. If they're trying to rush you to sign because they're using those tactics, it's definitely something that you want to look at. So what do you do if you suspect affinity fraud? Maybe you've already been approached by someone. Maybe you're in that situation. Maybe you're looking at some investments right now. So here's what to do if you're suspecting or you just doesn't sit right with you. Would be don't be pressured or rushed into buying an investment before you've had a chance to research it. Just because someone else has made money or maybe they've have claims to have made money, it doesn't mean you will too. They'll say, well, let me show you my bank statement or let me show you this. That's great. Proof is always good to get, but make sure it's legitimate and their claim is not too good to be true. You want to be skeptical about investments that are pitches once in a lifetime opportunities, particularly when any salesperson bases that on inside or confidential information. That once in a lifetime, if it's a once in a lifetime, then chances are I would walk away from that. That's something that, again, from personal experience and dealing with people who have been pitched and invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in investment and lost it. Many of which have lost businesses and homes and marriages over it. And so it's just not worth it. Here's some resources for you for Utah. Anytime you're researching any type of investment advice, you've got the Utah Division of Securities. There's the website and phone number. You can call them and speak with them. And then the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. So investor.gov is a great website that goes over how to check out the backgrounds of and information of anyone that you're working with. And there's also a phone number there too. So just two really good resources. We pulled that back up. So with that, I'm going to open it up to any questions that anyone has, and we can talk about it. And let me just stop sharing my.
There was one question in the chat said, what are the issues with HOAs?
Yeah, so HOAs, the issue with that would be it's a group. So for example, you all live in the same community and you may have meetings or you may have things. And so they'll use that HOA as a vehicle. Maybe you've got a list of people's names and phone numbers and emails that are in your HOA. And just because you're in the same HOA, it's that affinity group that brings you together, that common interest that brings you together. So hopefully that answers your question. Another question in the chat box was, what website can you check on investment advisors, licenses, and credibility? So that was that last slide that I just shared, and hopefully that was helpful for you.
Preston?
What other questions do folks have?
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
I was the one that asked the question about the HOA, and it sounds like it was more than that. I mean, I understand that we're in the same organization and when we're in an HOA, but what are problems that arise? Because the HOA I'm in doesn't seem to communicate with the members.
I've just had situations where individuals that are part of an HOA, they say, well, there might be a space where they can meet together. It could be an investment group that meets together right there within their community that they all live in. And so using that vehicle to do that, or it might be someone that's the leader of the HOA that's claiming that they're a part of this opportunity or once in a lifetime opportunity, and you need to act now, just because they've been sold on it and maybe they're bought into it, and now they're kind of that spokesperson for the group, and they're trying to generate or garner interest from others. So that's what I meant by that.
I get it. And what group are you with?
I'm with Valley Behavioral Health.
Oh, you're not an investment company.
I am not. I am not an investor. I'm not an registered investment advisor. I'm here to. You may have missed my introduction, and so I worked in the field for several years, and I had seen many instances of individuals, and many of which are seniors, who have been taken advantage of. And so this is something that I've dealt with on a personal level. There's a question in the chat. It says, Frim Doppel, can you find if someone is licensed, but will the Division of Securities tell if someone is suspected of fraud? It seems to take years and millions lost before you can find out if someone is perpetrating fraud. The Division of Securities does keep a log and website of anyone that's been part of a fraud scheme, or if they've been convicted of a crime that involves fraud. There's been some very high profile, very significant fraud cases over the last 20 years here in Utah. If you just pulled up Affinity Fraud, Google in Utah, you'll find probably about 6 very large cases. Some of those are real estate, and some of those are other affinity fraud type of schemes. But Division of Securities is one that you can look at. The SEC would be the other one on a national level that you can look at.
You know, Preston, I was just frauded through buying something online. And the item, I bought it long months ago and forgot about it. And I received it last week, and it was not a true facsimile of what it was supposed to be. And when I called the company, they said, does it have the logo on the bottom? And I said, no. And they said, it's not ours.
So how are you approached for that particular item? Did you seek that out, or did they seek you out? And is it Mariah? Is that your name?
Maria.
Maria. Okay.
I think it was on an advertisement, maybe on Facebook or online, and it was buying a nativity scene. And I don't usually buy much online, but I thought, oh, I've always wanted one. Maybe I'll just buy it. And they used the bona fide company's boxes to put it in even. And the thing where they made a mistake is that they mailed it through the post office instead of sending it UPS or whatever. And the post office, I called them, and they're investigating it because that's fraud for them.
Right. Yep. I mean, anytime a postal fraud, and if they're using the Postal Service to do that, then it's higher convictions if that does in fact go to court. So I'm sorry to hear that. We all learn lessons along the way, but we're here to share information together so that we can help each other prevent being defrauded, and that's one classic example. So thank you for sharing that. Does anyone else have any maybe personal experiences or questions that you want to share with the group?
I have a question. I consider my home an investment. Do all these apply to selling your home by owner?
No, and is this Jane?
Yes. Yes.
No, these don't all associate with real estate or your home. I'll use one example that I'm aware of that I was involved with and had to go and do some investigation on credit reports. And that was with a group of students that were attending a university here in our state. And they went to, there was a poster that was hung up at the school, and it said, come to a course to learn about real estate investing and earn $250 just for coming. So you can imagine that room was pretty full of college age students, which it was. And unfortunately, the information that they were asked to fill out included their social security numbers. And so here's some college students that don't have a lot to, as it is, giving out their name, their social security number, and other identifying information. Well, come to find out that the people that were running this class were using their information to obtain loans in their name. They're called it's called straw buying is the term that's used. And they were obtaining loans to buy homes in Florida. And so it came to fruition, you know, a college student pulls up their credit report and sees that they have a loan for $500,000 for a home that was purchased in Florida, not knowing anything about it, which is affecting their ability to get tuition reimbursements or any sort of additional scholarship money and things like that. So unbeknownst to them, this was a scheme that affected over 100 college students in our state, and it took years and years and years to clear up. And again, it was a group of individuals who knew folks at the university, and they were willing to put up this information on a bulletin board, and that's a classic affinity fraud type of scheme. So it's tragic.
I think I was at one of them seminars when I was in my 20s, and I'll bet I gave all that information out, signing them papers, got me all excited about the real estate business. But luckily, the only thing that happened to me, I received a set of books on how to do it myself for what I paid. That's all I got.
I appreciate you bringing that up, because there are lots of different, you know, I guess the best term would be get rich quick schemes, where it's a seminar or a workshop of someone that's going to sell you books, tapes, CDs, whatever it might be, to help teach you maybe the tips, the tricks of the trade. There was another case in Utah where they used a radio show. This person was convicted and went to prison here in Utah for real estate, but they used a radio show to garner interest, and it became a huge following in Utah. A lot of people were listening, and they were having these workshops, and hundreds of people would go and show up, and invested a lot of money, and that was a huge case that was uncovered. And that stemmed in Utah County is where that one came out of.
Yeah,
and I'm not going to give specifics, but
I did have that up. I did take that course right uptown at that hotel restaurant place. It's still there. I can't remember the name, but yeah, it was downtown Utah somewhere.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that and bringing that up.
You're welcome.
Any other examples or questions that folks have, or anything that would be helpful to share?
Preston, this is Mari again. I don't know if you remember the man that was in the movie Catch Me If You Can.
Sure.
And he came to Utah. He's a real person. He came to Utah and spoke with the AARP one day. And I happened to go to that because I thought it was so interesting. But the only thing I gleaned out of it, you know, he was a crook, and then they arrested him, and now he works for the FBI. And he said, you never want to have a debit card. And I've never had a debit card, but I wondered why, because I just figured, it doesn't matter. Well, he said the debit card is the most unsafe cards to have, because if they scam you, it's gone.
Yeah, there are some protections. So yeah, the person you're talking about in the movie, his name's Frank Abagnale. He's the main actor that Leonardo DiCaprio plays in the movie. If you haven't seen it, it's maybe something that's worth watching. But he's doing check fraud, and he's using the airlines, specifically, I think it was Pan Am and a couple others, to write fraudulent checks. And anyway, he was writing checks internationally. And what they're referring to is on the debit card, your account number is embedded in that code at the bottom of your number. It might be, and it's gotten better over the years, but if you look at your check, if you still write checks, many if you still do, at the bottom of your check, those first 9 numbers are what's called a routing number. And that routing number is assigned to your financial institution, either your bank or credit union. So if you're doing a wire or you're transferring money, they need that routing number. The next line of numbers is going to be your account number that's associated with your checking account. And so if you have that information right there alone, you can do payments over the phone. And this happened to me personally. I was at a department store and I was buying a gift for someone, and I could tell that the person that was running the cash register, I just didn't have a good feeling about him. And come to find out, he had taken down my information. He took a picture of my debit card with his phone, and they have this on camera at the department store of him doing it. He took my card and kind of turned around and flashed a picture both front and back. So it had the security code. It had I don't put my signature on it. I say see photo ID is what I write on in that signature line. And sometimes they ask for my photo ID, but 9 times out of 10, they don't. And so anyway, that individual went ahead and purchased a bunch of things online using my debit card. Luckily, I'm one of those people that checks my account probably more than I should. And I noticed it right off the bat, and they were able to flag it. But you had to go to the bank. I had to close my account, get a new account number, get a new card, So it's one of those things that, in a debit card, you don't have as many safety or what I would call precautionary measures on it versus a credit card. A credit card, you're only liable up to $50 for anything that's considered fraudulent, whereas a debit card, that's not always the case. So again, it's something that you'll want to check with your financial institution on if it is taken or stolen. And nowadays, you have a lot of technology that you can freeze your card and unfreeze your card very quickly if you lose it. Many of you probably use your phone for payments, which is tapped into your checking account, or maybe use Venmo, same type of thing. Good question. Thank you.
I got another. I want to say thank you too. I happened to make the right decision where all the big money is, and I would not have a debit card or a checking account. It's strictly walk in and get and leave, and the one with the debit card and checking account, I went to a different bank, and I always keep that amount under $1,500. So I'm glad to hear that I made a wise choice.
That's a good decision. That's a good definitely something to consider in terms of not keeping a lot of money in that account that's associated with your debit card. So if you are taken for a ride, that you're not going to be losing your life savings from that. One other thing I'm going to mention too, I think it's important, would be if you're going to get a copy of your credit report, there's one site that allows you to get it for free. If you just type in free credit report, the above the fold in Google, it's going to be mostly paid. You're going to have to pay for that. But the one site, and I'll put it in the chat box, it's annualcreditreport.com. And that you're entitled to a free copy of your credit report from one of each of the 3 credit bureaus every year. So I would recommend that you check that regularly. And what I do is pull one up about every 3 or 4 months. And it's not going to be a hard inquiry on your credit, so it's not going to affect that because you're just checking it for accuracy. So it's annualcreditreport.com. I just put that in the chat box so that you can see that. And that way you can go and request a copy of your credit report. If maybe you suspect something, or maybe you're worried about something on your credit report. This is how we uncovered those straw buyers for those college students that were affected by it. So just something to think about. So the question in the chat is, what's the difference between a hard credit bureau report and a soft? So a hard credit or a hard inquiry would be a lender, or if you're applying for credit, would be considered a hard pull on your credit, versus a soft would mean you're pulling it on your own. It's a consumer or originated request. So you're just checking it for accuracy. You're not applying for credit. You're not applying for a loan. You're just checking it on your own to make sure that everything looks legitimate. And if something's on there that's not accurate, you can report that to the credit bureau that's reporting it. There's 3 different credit reporting agencies. They're all different. Many of them share information, but not all of them are the same. And I'll share a story with you. And when I was coming out of college, and I was applying for my first home loan, I went and I was getting, going through underwriting, and my loan officer said, well, it shows that you already have a home loan. And I said, oh, that's interesting. I don't have a home. But he said, your credit score is really, really high for a college student. And the good news was it was my grandfather's home loan that was on my credit report. So it actually helped me, but it wasn't my loan. And so we share a similar name. And because of that, it affected, in this case, it was good, not bad. But just make sure that, especially if you have a common name, John Smith is something that you may have information on there that is a different John Smith. So just something to consider. And I would highly recommend that you look at your credit reports regularly. It's something that you should do, part of like your spring cleaning, or maybe it's a New Year's resolution, things like that. Just wrap that into your goals and something that you should do regularly.
Preston, I never checked my credit, and I'm almost in anxiety when I think about it, just to go on the computer at all. So at the end of the class, you got my email. Would you send me some safe sites to check my credit?
So I don't have your email. So this would, it's something that I don't have access to, but I did put, are you on your phone or are you on your computer?
I'm on a tablet from the aging services.
Okay. So can you see the chat box on your screen at the bottom right?
I think so, there.
So if you click that chat button at the bottom right.
Okay.
Do you see any of the comments there?
On the right, huh? Let me see again.
The bottom right-hand corner, there should be a box that says chat.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So click on that.
Yeah. Oh,
and that should bring up a screen. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Okay,
so you want me to type my email there?
No, you don't need to type your email.
Okay.
But you can see that the site that I entered, where it says from Preston Cochran to everyone at 242, annualcreditreport.com, that would be the website that you could go to. That would be very easy and free of charge. You wouldn't have to pay anything for it.
Okay. I'm going to write that down.
Perfect.
Okay, thanks.
Great. A good question here from Linda. Do you think Venmo is safe to use? So I use Venmo for a lot of things. I used Venmo last night to pay an umpire for my Little League baseball game because that's just the way we do it now. Versus writing a check, we can just send the money right there, and the next day they've got it. And for the most part, Venmo is safe to use. I'm sure there's instances out there where someone would say otherwise, but for me personally, I've never had any situations or bad experiences using Venmo. And there's other things like Venmo that are out there. We're not going to endorse any particular one site or provider, but Venmo is one of many that allows you to pay electronically or receive money electronically. Let's say you go out to dinner with a friend and they forget their checkbook and they say, well, I'll just Venmo you the money. They go on their phone and they send you that $20 and the next day you have it.
And the good thing is it's free.
Yeah, and it's free. Definitely. Okay, we're running out of time. We're getting close to the top of the hour. We want to be considerate of everyone's time, but if there's other questions, we'll entertain those and talk about them if anyone has any. Winnie, thanks for joining us. Winnie is signing off.
Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks, Betty. I'm glad it was helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Preston. If we don't have any more questions, we really want to thank you for coming. This is a really important topic, and I hope you all will take to heart what he said and protect yourself from scams. So thank you so much. I also wanted to remind you that next week our webinar is going to be the health benefits of gardening, and it'll be taught by Erica Thompson. So hopefully you can join us next week. And
yes.
are there any other questions for Preston before we log off? All right. Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Preston, for joining us today and all the great information. And thanks everyone for coming.